Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez. Great to be back in the chair today, and thank you to Phil Ross for filling in for me yesterday. We've got 2 hours to do today because it's Thursday. And actually, today's second hour is going to be on the radio tomorrow, Good Friday, because we're taking a half day off. We'll be here in the studio in the morning, and then we'll head on over to the Good Friday service at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa that starts at 12 noon. So we will not be live on the radio tomorrow, but we will be live on Monday, the 10th. So 2-hour Thursday, second hour will air on Friday, and then we'll be back this coming Monday. But give us a call if you've got a question either this hour or next hour. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. 888-564-6173. You can also send us your questions using the Facebook Messenger feature on the Pastor's Perspective Facebook page, but we prefer to hear the sound of your voice, so give us a call at 888-564-6173. You can watch us on Facebook, you can watch us on YouTube too, but the best way to get your question answered is to call us at 888-564-6173. And answering your questions today, we've got Brian Broderson, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California. That reminds me, today, these 2 hours will be your last opportunity to ask Brian a question, because he'll be away for about a week or so. So if you've got a question that you've always wanted to ask Brian, you'd better call us today at 888-564-6173. And on the Bobby Cam, we've got Bobby Conway, the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. You can learn more about Bobby on his website, ChristianityStillMakesSense.com. Listen to his podcast/radio program there, ChristianityStillMakesSense.com. How's it going, guys?
Great.
Good, guys. How are you? Rushing away here.
I was going to say, you look a little rushed.
Disheveled. I know. I had things unplugged and everything else, so my apologies. How are you guys?
You were here.
Yeah, I was a little concerned for a moment. I thought maybe the rapture had happened, and it started, on the East Coast and was making its way over here. We were still here, but you were gone. But then you reappeared.
I thought maybe it was the Great White Throne Judgment, but it was just Bobby's white chair.
Well, actually, I forgot Bobby's post-trib, so it passed him by, and it's on its way here right now.
He's going to have to live through it. The rest of us aren't.
No, it's a time zone rapture, so we're 3 hours ahead of you, and then you'll get lifted up on Pacific time.
That's right.
That's how it works. No, it's not. No, it's not. All right, 888-564-6173 is the number to call. As I mentioned, the Good Friday services at Calvary Costa Mesa tomorrow at 12 noon. We'd love to see you tomorrow, April 7th. And you can also watch it live at live.cccm.com on Sunday. The sunrise service at 6 a.m., 2 services at 8:30 and 11. And if you're here locally, bring the kids out for an Easter egg hunt at about 10 o'clock in the morning. Did I get it all right?
You got it.
Woohoo! Gold star. All right. Here is a Facebook question. This one was sent in by Nikki, who says, I love the energy on the program. I hope she doesn't mean like in a weird new agey kind of stuff, not that kind of energy. But anyway, Nikki says, I have a question for you all. When Jesus was in heaven before he came to earth as our sacrifice, was he in human form, as in a physical person in appearance, when he was with the Father in heaven? Or did he just have a physical body when he was here on earth? What do you say, Brian?
Oh, yes. Physical body, yes. When he was here on earth, he took upon himself a physical body in what we call the incarnation. So prior to that, he, existed in a form, but it wasn't a physical form. So in the Old Testament, you have a number of occasions where you have the angel of the Lord is appearing. He appears to Abraham. He appears to the parents of Samson. He appears to Moses in the burning bush. All of those are appearances of Christ in a form, but not in a physical form in the sense that we know it, because it's not an actual human body that he's appearing in. And that's somewhat of a mystery. We don't know exactly what type of a body that was, but it wasn't a human body in the most strict sense. Although it appeared that way, it wasn't, because that only happened at the incarnation.
Okay, Nikki, hope that answers your question. Bobby, did you want to chime in?
No, that's great.
That was a good answer. All right, and here's one from Angelica in Kingman, Arizona, wondering about Matthew 27:52. What does it mean? Were these men and women literally risen from the dead, and why? Are these the men and women who were in Abraham's bosom, or does it represent something more? Bobby, what do you say?
The men and women, of Abraham's bosom.
What?
I said Abraham's bosom. I think I pronounced that. I think I jacked that up. What do you think, Brian?
I think you were combining bosom and button, and you came out with buzzin' or something.
Or the Higgs. I thought you were talking the Higgs bosom.
So what?
I know, right? Oh my word! All right. So when Jesus, what was your question? What are we talking about here? We've got Higgs bosom.
It was about the bosom of Abraham.
Matthew 27:52. Angelica wants to know if these men and women literally rose from the dead, and why. And are these the men and women who were in Abraham's
the notorious
bosom?
The notorious text on those pesky risen saints.
I know, right?
Yes.
Well, that's the only historical piece of data that we have as it relates to that event. There isn't extra biblical data that we have. That doesn't mean that it's not buried underground. I'm sure there is written stuff. We just haven't excavated it. When you think about that incident, it is bizarre, right? I mean, Jesus rises from the dead, and then these Old Testament saints rise up. Some would say that that's kind of a figurative language, speaking in an apocalyptic way about what's going to happen down the road. But it reads literally like this happened. It's just surprising that you don't hear a whole lot about what's happening. But an argument, from silence doesn't mean that it didn't happen. We have enough just in the text right there for those that are wanting to ascribe to a literal interpretation of that. So the question then would be the saints that rose in that instance. Well, all the pre-New Testament saints were in the same space, so to speak. So I would say that if you're thinking about like how many of these saints rose in that moment, we just don't know how many would have came on the scene. Was it a lot? Was it thousands? It certainly wouldn't have been all the saints. That would have just really congested things that pre-existed. So I would say that they would have been kind of in sort of this paradise place with God. You could call it Abraham's bosom. You could call it kind of not the final heaven, just a place of bliss.
Angel, thank you for sending in your question on Facebook Messenger. And our first Facebook Messenger question from Nikki, wondering if Jesus had a physical body on heaven, perhaps prompted Janice to call in with her question. What did you want to know, Janice?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Now, I had a question about physical bodies in heaven, too. When we die and we go be with the Lord, are we spirits or do we have bodies?
What do you say, Brian?
Well, until the resurrection, I think we don't have our physical bodies until the resurrection or the rapture. Those things happen concurrently. So if a person dies now who is a believer and they go into the presence of the Lord, Hebrews 12, it kind of is talking about the heavenly Jerusalem, and it's the place where there's an innumerable company of angels, the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. And then it says, and the spirits of the just made perfect. So the spirits of the just. So I would say that a person who dies, prior to, like I said, the rapture or the resurrection, their spirit goes to be with the Lord, but their body is not yet there, and that will happen when the body is resurrected. There'll be a reuniting of the body and the spirit. And now, just what the spiritual body, if you will, looks like, we don't really know. We don't have any kind of description in Scripture of that.
Does that help you, Janice?
Yes, but I do have one more question about it. So we're supposed to be able to know our friends and relatives in heaven that are there too, but if we don't have bodies, will we recognize them?
Well, we don't have physical bodies. That's the point. We don't have material. These bodies that we have now, we don't have these bodies. But we do have some form. We do have some shape. There is some, it is us. So I would imagine, yes, we will be able to recognize people, but what the form that they have is not the body that they will have, the glorified body in the future.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, Janice.
Thanks for calling.
Yep, 888-564-6173. Bobby, I'm trying to let you in. Not sure what's going on. I'll try to figure this out in a little bit. In the meantime, let's go to Kaylee in California, who wants to know about Revelation chapter 6, verse 10. I'll start in verse 9. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Kaylee, what did you want to know about that passage?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to mention that this verse represents heaven in some ways that contradicts at least my biblical understanding of heaven, how heaven should be. It seems that these saints don't have a concept of or don't know the future. And if the limit of time and space has been removed, it seems to me that they should know. And the other one is that it feels like they have some negative emotions, like being anxious or disappointed, that when God would you avenge our blood? And there's supposed to be no sorrow or no negative emotions, if you will, in heaven. So I just wanted to see how we reconcile those concepts, or maybe, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Bobby, what do you say to Kaylee?
Well, Kaylee, that's actually really insightful. And I do think that when we talk about heaven, we need to be careful when we're talking about it as a place of perfection, to think that that means for us that we will be perfect in every way like God. That is to say, God's omniscient, he's all-knowing, but that doesn't mean when we are in heaven that we will be all-knowing. Keep in mind, even Jesus, now this is where if you're a post-trib person and you take the rapture and the second coming as one and the same, then at this stage, Jesus would still, according to his human nature, not know the time or the hour. So if Jesus could say that in his incarnation, then I would say perhaps that same could be attributed to the saints in heaven. Now, some could say, well, once he got his glorified body, then he would have been fastened with this mental acuity and awareness of knowing that. Again, in his divine nature, he obviously would have had the wherewithal to understand the timing on that. But that's just to say that obviously in heaven, we're not going to know everything, right? We will have a complete knowledge, and that's what perfect can also mean, complete. In other words, we will have a complete knowledge of what God would want us to know, but we will not have an exhaustive knowledge in like an omniscient being such as God has. So there obviously not aware on some of these timing issues as it relates to their emotions. What you're hearing is their desire for, the end times to come about, for the ultimate consummation of God's justice and the reunion of all the saints. So you're hearing that even in heaven, I don't think that they're in a sort of anguish, but I do think that they're left with desire, and desires are unfulfilled until the final consummation that we await. And so I really do think that while heaven is a place where we're not sinning, it doesn't mean that we don't have desires, in particular, a desire for the final wrap of the eschaton.
What are your thoughts, Brian?
My thoughts are, Bobby's thoughts were great and
word for word.
sufficient.
Verbatim, what you were going to say.
Yeah.
Hope that helps you, Kaylee. Thank you for calling us today on the Pastor's Perspective program. We're going to be here till 5 p.m. Pacific time today to take your calls at 888-564-6173. 888-564-6173. Joseph in California with a question about Ezekiel. Go ahead, Joseph.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hello.
Quick question. Ezekiel 37, correct me if I'm wrong, please. I understand that when the turn my air conditioning down. I'm driving. Sorry, guys. That probably was loud. And when the bones are when they're bringing the bones back, that's bringing back in the first half of Ezekiel 37. It's talking about bringing Israel back to a nation. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The scattering of the bones, and
Yep.
then but the second half when they're talking about the sticks.
Yep.
And then David and Joseph,
Mm-hmm.
and I know it was divided. Can you tell me what time frame that is? Because the first part is about bringing Israel back in 1948,
Yep.
but the second part that's after that, what time frame is that, and what does it really mean?
Well, it's talking about the reunification of the nation. So when the nation went into captivity, it was divided. Part of the nation went into captivity to never really return in 721 BC under the Assyrian Sennacherib. And then the southern kingdom went into captivity in 586 BC with Nebuchadnezzar. And prior to that, from the time of Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, and Jeroboam, who took the northern kingdom, the nation had been divided. And so the point is, when God restores Israel, it will no longer be a divided nation. It will be one nation. The time frame for it, personally, I think that the time frame is all in the context of the second coming of Christ. Ezekiel 37, 38, 39 are talking about, some people see Ezekiel 37 as, okay, it's fulfilled now. The Jewish people are back in the land, and then they're waiting for this confederation of nations led by Russia to come down and attack Israel anytime. And a lot of people see that is a maybe simultaneous with the rapture, pre-rapture. It's pre-tribulation. It's before the tribulation. It's before the rise of the Antichrist. And then they see that the Antichrist comes onto the scene, and then all the things that the book of Revelation talks about are fulfilled. I personally don't see it like that. I think that the battle that is described in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is the battle of Armageddon. And from there, chapter 40, you go into the millennial kingdom, the 1,000-year reign of Christ. So it could be that, presently, not every Jew in the world is back in Israel, but the people in the land there's no longer two kingdoms. There's now one people of Israel. There's not a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom anymore.
Does that help you, Joseph?
That is a great answer. I'm dealing with some Mormons right now they're friends, and we're talking about, and they were trying to bring up Ezekiel 37, and we're going to talk about it next week.
Yes.
That the sticks.
The stick of Joseph.
And I'm trying to be prepared for this debate.
Yeah.
And one other thing is, I don't know if I have a second question, is and they're starting to bring up the Apocrypha.
Yeah.
When was the Apocrypha written?
Most of the Apocrypha was written in the intertestamental period. So the time between Malachi and Matthew is approximately a 400-year period, and the Apocrypha was written in that period and probably late in that period. The book of Maccabees, the two books of Maccabees are part of the Apocrypha. The Maccabean revolt and all of those things took place in, I think, 162 BC, 165 BC, something like that. So the literature most of it comes from around that period of time. But the funny thing about the Mormon church is they actually take that Ezekiel passage and they try to say that the stick is Joseph Smith, which I think that would be a huge surprise to Ezekiel and to all the people of Israel.
I think so too. Joseph, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. And
Joseph?
His name was Joseph, yeah. Yes. He had his air conditioning going at the beginning of the phone call.
Because we're talking about Joseph, the son of Jacob.
Yes,
we're talking about Joseph Smith.
Let's not confuse them.
Who's calling?
Let's not confuse them.
I'm confused.
All right, Kelly, you're next on Pastor's Perspective. Welcome to the program.
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
Sure.
My question was about the Synoptic Gospels. I've heard a lot of different opinions on that, as early as 41 for Matthew, sometimes late first, second century, early. There seems to be less confusion on John's Gospel as to it was written. I just wondered what you guys' opinion was on when the originals were written.
Okay. Bobby, what do you say?
Yeah, it's interesting that we're coming up on a lot of this discussion. I read the Apocrypha over the last week and read several of the Gnostic Gospels this week and been kind of living and camping out in some of the early church fathers' writings. And so, it's interesting conversation as it relates to the Gnostic Gospels. I mean, these are definitely written later, and they're not even written by the authors that they pretend to be put out by, like Thomas and Philip and Mary. I mean, Judas. These are, people who lived in the first century, and they're long gone. As it relates to the first century Gospels, typically people will say that Mark was written first, and that Matthew and Luke would have leveraged, Mark, and that is why they're called the Synoptic Gospels, because they're seen together. And so you could look at maybe anywhere between the mid 50s and 60s where these are being written. John's kind of out there, around 80, 90-ish, but there are scholars that will even put John before 80, 70. In particular, those who are preterists would maybe take that route. For me, I don't feel compelled to come down with an actual hard year. I'd rather speak in ranges because I think that feels a little bit more modest to what we're up against there. And so as you're trying to get at those dates, that's something to remember. And then I would also say there is a book by Brad Petrie who talks a lot about the claim that comes up that the gospel writers, that they're anonymous, that we don't know who they were. Some will say because the text doesn't say Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and he has utterly dispelled that and has shown that not only do the Greek manuscripts that we do have show that, so do the other manuscripts that we have from the earliest centuries show Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the title page, so to speak, as authors. So I would just say those are a few things to consider. And the book that he wrote is the top one. Go back to the top there. I'm not seeing that. I could look it up.
Is it
right there, The Case for Jesus.
The Case for Jesus. Yeah, I've got that book. Yeah.
Any thoughts from you, Brian, on this?
No, I think, everything Bobby said is great. I do think, Bobby, this is more me and you talking about this, but I've often wondered about the whole, AD 90 date for John's gospel too. And I mean, one of the things that stands out to me, and it doesn't prove it, but John writes about Jerusalem. It seems not like sort of in the past tense, like there was a gate in Jerusalem, but there is a gate in Jerusalem. So it almost seems like Jerusalem is still intact when John is writing his gospel. So I've often wondered about. And, it doesn't matter either way, but I've just wondered about that 90 date versus a pre-70 AD date.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of those things for me, it I'm sure is for you, it doesn't really matter a whole lot to me. I mean, I just think as long as we wrap it up before these guys pass away. Yeah. I think that's
I was thinking about writing a thesis on it to see if I could get a PhD. So I was wondering what you thought, if it would be a good topic.
Yeah. Yes, that would be a lot of fun to think about for 7 years. And I'm sure it would have just a massive relevance to the culture today.
Radically transformational for...
Oh, yes.
Yes, exactly.
Hey, Kelly, thanks for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. 888-564-6173. Never know what these guys are going to say. 888-564-6173.
Well, the thing is, it's kind of like sometimes when you look at the topics that, people write doctoral thesis on, you wonder, like, how could you think about that for so long? It just doesn't even seem possible. Did you know Richard Dawkins? You know Richard Dawkins is a biologist, right? Did you know what his doctoral thesis was in?
Mm-mm.
Did you know, Bobby? Do you know what his doctoral thesis is in?
No, I'm curious to hear you.
This is going to really rock your world, man. His doctoral thesis is in, it's the study of a chicken, the way chickens pluck up their food and their beak. And I mean, it's just like the craziest thing in the world. Like, who would ever sit around and think about this for this amount of time?
Wow.
Yes, I know, right? And it's not that there's contributions that aren't to be made, but there are some contributions that are less significant than others.
I guess if you're a chicken farmer, it probably holds a tremendous amount of relevance, but...
Yeah, for sure. Kelly, thanks for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. Let's go to Dawn in California. Go ahead, Dawn.
Hi, pastors. Thanks for taking my call. Excuse me, I have a slight cold here. But my question is this. What happens to you when you pass away? Do you go to heaven and rest, and then when all come together when Christ returns? Or does when you take your last breath here, you are immediately in the presence of God, judged, and then rest? How does that work?
Bobby, what say you to Dawn?
I would say that, yes, you go to heaven and you're with God. Paul the Apostle writes, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. But we aren't, fully there. And what do I mean by that? I remember when I was in seminary, I had a historical theology professor, Dr. Bingham, and he really wanted to help us to understand how much our body is a part of us. And I liked it because what can happen is if you don't realize how much your body is a part of you, like we're immaterial soul and material body, but people who don't value their body as something that's going to last forever, then they can kind of have a bad relationship with it. And our body is going to be glorified someday, and our body is a part of us too. And that part of us is sleeping while it awaits future resurrection, while our soul is awake the moment we die.
Got to take a break now here on Pastor's Perspective. We'll be back with more of your questions. What are your questions? Give us a call till 5 at 888-564-6173, 888-564-6173, 5 p.m. Pacific time, that is, 888-564-6173. We're back on Pastor's Perspective. I'm Brian Perez. It is 2-Hour Thursday. I love 2-Hour Thursday because, 1 hour Tuesday and 1 hour Wednesday and 1 hour Friday. We always seem to run out of time before we can get to all the calls. So 2-Hour Thursday gives us until 5 p.m. Pacific time to talk to you at 888-564-6173. If you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube right now, you can call us. The number's right there on the bottom of your screen. It's 888-564-6173. And answering your questions today, we've got Brian Broderson and Bobby Conway. Brian's the pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa here in Southern California. Bobby's the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we are here to talk to you, so call us please at 888-564-6173. Shall we proceed, gentlemen?
Let us proceed.
Let us proceed.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, we're going to begin with Christy in California. Welcome to the program, Christy.
Hello.
Hi. What's on your mind?
So, my question, I'm sorry, you guys totally threw me. Is that true about Dawkins wrote his thesis on chickens?
Yes.
It's not fake news?
Amazing.
He is a biologist.
You would think, if anything, it would have been what came first, the chicken or the egg, or something like that, if he was going to do something on chickens.
That might have been included. I don't know.
Could be somewhere in there.
Well, my question is, and it's really not burning, it's just I'm curious what your input would be about what Jesus and God's relationship would be pre-incarnate. In other words, it doesn't really refer to that in the Old Testament, the Son of God. So what would that relationship be between God and Jesus? And I'm going to hang up and listen.
Do you mean, was it like a typical father-son relationship? Did they play catch? Did they... You don't mean that, do you?
Be begotten. Yeah.
Okay. Bobby, what would you say to Christy?
Well, God has eternally existed in triune community, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, one God in three persons. What was the nature of that relationship? I don't really know. I mean, it was glorious. It was there was love, but it is hard to picture that for me. I mean, it's like, how do you inform another person who doesn't need to be informed how you're doing? So what's the nature of the connection, right? Like, we swap information. What information do you swap when you know all information? Hey, Father, let me tell you how I'm feeling about this. Well, I'm feeling this. So it's very, very hard for me to even envision what the relationship looks like. But we know that there would have been a mutual relational satisfaction that would have been eternally blissful amongst the Godhead. But I can't even begin to envision what that looks like, because God is immaterial. So we can't picture them talking, because talking requires, having a tongue and a mouth to form words and vocabulary. Yet maybe in the same way that we can sense words in our spirit from the Holy Spirit, and maybe there's this sense that they could connect with each other in that way. But I really don't know. I mean, they were working together on a plan for, the universe that we live in. But how long did that take? What did that look like? How long was the triune God in community before Satan was created as Lucifer and the angelic host? How long before the rebellion? How long before Adam and Eve were created? So all of this stuff, it's very hard to know. So instead, I'm left with pondering the attributes of God and thinking about what that means, that God's all-powerful, he's all-knowing, he's omnipresent, he's eternal, he's holy. So then how does that shake out relationally? What does that mean in a pre-material realm? You're kind of in a triune community, and you're all-powerful, you're all-knowing, you're ever-present, and you're holy. And therefore, you deserve all the glory. What's connection look like? I have no idea.
What about you, Brian? What do you think?
Well, if Bobby would have asked me, I could have just told him what it was, and he wouldn't have had to be thinking so hard about this. I have no idea either, no. I mean, no.
I think you stumped us, Christy.
The best you can do is just, you can imagine, you can think about what that might be. I mean, in some way, but it's not this, but just think about your own relationship with yourself. So, you have your, you have your conscience, you have, the sort of that inner person that you dialogue with.
Here's your PhD, Brian.
Huh? What's that?
Here's your PhD.
Yes, that's it.
Okay. So, and again, this is nowhere close. I'm not saying this is what it is. I'm just saying, if you think about like how, as a human being, you kind of have this inner dialogue that you have with yourself. You're conscious of, what you think and all of these sorts of things. So I would imagine that to some extent, it's something like that. But of course, we're talking about a unique situation where there are three persons who are at the same time the one person. So I think this is above, as they say, above the pay grade. I think this is above everybody's pay grade, because I can't think of anybody who's ever really, C.S. Lewis talked about, he kind of described the somewhat of the relationship between the three persons of the Godhead as a dance. Tim Keller picked up on that, and he elaborated on it. But again, I would imagine that Augustine probably, he was probably the most brilliant thinker in these kinds of realms ever. So if anybody said anything about it, I would think Augustine might have.
Yeah, Brian, I do think your approach is probably the closest thing that we can have, given that we are created in God's image. Mm-hmm. The difference is we are one person with one nature.
Yeah.
We're a human being with the human nature. And I would say we're God, that's where it makes it tough to relate. But I realize what you're saying, there's some truth to that. Like, if we're one person with one nature having conversations amongst ourselves, then it's not hard to imagine how God could have a conversation amongst himself. So I think you got it right, bud.
All right. Okay, this could be the PhD.
This could be it.
I don't know.
I think so.
Now, Engineer Johnny reminded me of
ourselves.
Matthew 3:17. Suddenly a voice came from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased."
Yeah,
so
that's great, except this is post-incarnation, not pre-incarnation. So the question had to do with pre-incarnation.
Before.
Sorry, Johnny, it was a good try.
Yes. An A for effort. Christy, what do you think?
Well, that actually, as far as explaining the Trinity, that's way above everybody's pay grade. But that's what you were saying about him being his son. That was what I was curious about, because he was never really referred to as God's son in the Old Testament. So that was my question was.
Yeah, no, he actually is. Remember Psalm 2, kiss the Son lest he be angry and you perish.
Is that a prophetic?
Yeah.
He's saying he's going to be born as his son?
Yeah, maybe it could be, because it's really hard. There's a theological debate that's been going on for literally centuries and centuries regarding what it means that he is the only begotten Son. And part of the debate is he eternally the Son, or did he become the Son upon the incarnation? Bobby, I know you've delved into that. What's your thinking on that?
Well, unfortunately, Bobby had an ADD moment, so I didn't catch the conversation.
So the eternal sonship of Christ, was he the Son in eternity past, or did he become the Son at the incarnation?
Right.
Yeah. So this is one of these conversations. You're exactly right that the church has gotten pretty worked up over. And I would say, when you're thinking about the scriptures, I kind of take him as God's eternal son, but then because he refers to him as his father, and when he's referring to him as his father, I don't think he's necessarily just referring to him as his father in the flesh, like as if to say he wouldn't have thought of him as his father before his flesh. So I think that there's still this subordination within the eternal Godhead where the Father sends out the Son and the Son sends out the Spirit, and we kind of get into the whole filioque controversy. And so I would say that for me, I'm comfortable seeing him as the eternal Son of God, who then takes on flesh, because that's just part of the familial dynamic of the Trinity and the way that they related to one another. How about you?
Yeah. Even as you're saying it, I'm thinking of Isaiah 9:6. For unto us a child is born, a son is given. So I think the Son is given. God, the Father, is giving the Son.
Yeah.
Rather than,
or John 3:16, he gave his only begotten Son.
His only Son. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think you're probably right.
But I could see how somebody would push back and saying, well, he didn't give his son until, I mean, it's just using that language in a sense of.
Yeah, and even in like the creed, the creed states that he, regarding the son, he's begotten, not made. And so, when you think of begotten, begotten seems like you're talking about, something coming into being that previously wasn't there. Begotten, it comes. So that's where it gets hard to think, okay, how does that work? And, like a lot of the newer translations of the New Testament, almost every one of them drop John 3:16, only begotten son, and replace it with one and only son. For this very reason, the debate over the term begotten, just, what does begotten mean? Because begotten means to be born of.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting to know some of the conversations, again, that whole filioque controversy, just the Latin phrase for, and the Son. And it's like, did the Holy Spirit proceed from the Father or from the Father and the Son? And so, let's get worked up about that right there. So, people were doing PhDs back then too, Brian.
They were, yeah. The filioque. I remember in my theology class, we had a great time with the word filioque. We did all kinds of fun things with it.
Oh man!
But this was a very thoughtful question, and
it's the stuff theses are made from.
Yeah. So thanks, Christy. And just for clarification on the Dawkins PhD. Now, since we're talking about that, Richard Dawkins. His PhD thesis was on selective pecking by domestic chicks.
That was the title?
Yes.
That was the subject, yeah.
The subject.
Selective pecking by domestic chicks, yeah.
Why not?
Okay. So has anybody done one on selective picking from undomesticated chicks?
Not picking, pecking.
That's what I meant to say.
I want to do one on selective.
I need some coffee.
Picking of blackberries.
Yeah, a bird pecks, not picks.
Selective picking of blackberries. How do they find the sweet ones? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. Let's do it. We'll find out. Christy, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. And how do I pick which question we're going to go to next? Well, I just roll a dice and see where we're going. No, it's Berlin in California. You're next on Pastor's Perspective. Welcome to the program.
Hi.
Hello. What's up with you?
I have a question.
Okay.
And it is, if Adam and Eve were the first people on earth and they had children, how did their children have children?
Berlin, that is such a great and thoughtful question.
Another thesis.
Well, so we don't do this today. We don't do this anymore. But way, way back in the early days of human history, people married their siblings, their sisters or their brothers, because, of course, there were no other people to marry. And so that's how the world became populated. So Adam and Eve had sons and daughters. The book of Genesis tells us that in chapter 5. They had sons and daughters. And so those sons and daughters would have married each other and had children, and that's how the human race began and grew.
Does that help you, Berlin?
Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be a mom and dad question right there.
Yeah. Yeah, and there came a time.
I'm like, let's see.
What was that? Sorry?
I'm sorry, this is Mom. She was just curious to see if there's maybe a biblical point, but you just specified Genesis 5, right?
Genesis 5 talks about Abraham talks about Adam having sons and daughters. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because up until that point, we think that Adam and Eve only had Cain, Abel, and Seth because they're the only ones that are mentioned. But Genesis 5 tells us that they had sons and daughters, plural.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering her question.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a delight.
Call back anytime, Berlin or Mom, 888-564-6173. To John we go in California. How can we help you, John?
Hey, how's it going? Good evening. So my question to you guys is the book of Ezekiel in the Old Testament and the book of Revelations in the New Testament the same thing? And, footnote, the creatures with the faces, with the eagle and the bull, what does that represent? Because those books are really heavy, and it's kind of hard to digest, so maybe you guys can enlighten me.
Well, there's a note here on the screen that says you just started reading the Bible. Is that correct? Are those the books you started with?
I actually read. I'm a new Christian. I grew up Catholic, and I used to read books of the Bible, like here and there. But I've been studying the Bible religiously for 6 months straight now. Mm-hmm. And I listen to the gospel every morning.
Great.
And I started, when I was younger, I wanted to turn into Judaism. Why? I don't know. And I got really familiar with the first 5 books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But now that I believe that Jesus Christ is my Savior, 100%, I want to know what comes, like when the Lord comes back, when Jesus comes back in 1 foot on land, 1 foot on sea, Lord of Lords, King of Kings. Those 2 books are really familiar. Like, it kind of mentions the same thing. So I'm just wondering, are they the same?
Mm-hmm.
And what are those creatures? What do those creatures represent?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The books are not the same, but they do have some points of overlap. And so the description you're talking about in the early chapters 2 and 3, 1, 2, and 3, I think, of Ezekiel, where Ezekiel is having a vision of the Lord. And so he sees the Lord, and it seems that he sees the throne of God and the creatures. You find these creatures in Isaiah chapter 6, and you find a similar picture in Revelation. The crossover is that they're all describing the throne of God. That's all of that imagery that is similar is a description of the throne of God. So you've got the 4 creatures, the ox and the lion and the eagle and the human, and they are. But when you put them all together, you find that each one of them are all 4. So they all have 4 faces, and they are what's called cherubim, and they are a class of being that is a very limited class of being, and they're the guardians of God's throne in whatever sense. Guardian, I don't know if guardian's the exact right word, but they're at the throne of God day and night. They praise him. Isaiah 6 says, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty." So that's overlap with Ezekiel, Isaiah, Revelation. But then in the later part of Ezekiel, you have a little bit of overlap as well, because you have the restoration of the nation of Israel after the centuries upon centuries upon centuries of them being dispersed, and their condition looks like a valley of dry bones. But then the bones come together, and the bones are clothed with flesh, and then breath is breathed into it, and the prophet is told by the angel, this is the whole house of Israel. So in Revelation chapter 7, we're reintroduced to the nation of Israel, the 12,000 from the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. So that's where you have the overlap between the two. But the rest of Ezekiel is a prophet who has been taken captive into Babylon, and he's living in Babylon, and he's prophesying about 2 things. He's prophesying about the coming destruction of Jerusalem, the total and complete destruction of Jerusalem, and he's also talking about the destruction of Babylon and the other kingdoms of the world in the future, and the restoration of the nation of Israel.
Does that help you, John?
Oh, awesome, man. I really highly appreciate you guys.
Well, good. Thanks for calling, John. Good to talk to you.
Yep. 888-564-6173 is the number to call from now till 5 p.m. Pacific time. Let's see. I think we can do one more call. Don't hang up because we're going to do a whole hour of the program in just a little bit. So don't hang up if your name is not Diane. Diane, we're going to take your question. Everybody else, stay on the phone. We'll get to you as soon as we can. Diane, what did you want to know?
Yes. When Satan was expelled from heaven, was he thrown here to the earth that it was formless and void, and then they created the earth to give us the free will and give us Adam and Eve to start that whole process?
What do you say, Bobby Conway?
Well, in the book of Revelation in chapter 12, he had been thrown down maybe to earth in the sense of, he's coming down during the tribulation era. So that is not referring to when the earth was tohu wabohu, without form and void. I would say also when Satan was cast out of heaven, I don't personally take it as earth had already been created. Some would do that. That's a particular position. It does beg the question then, where would he have been roaming? And so I think in the same way, even to say that he roams on the earth, I'm not sure what all that looks like. That can be because he's sort of like in an invisible realm of its own, and earth is a physical realm. So what is the interface of an invisible realm with a physical realm? We know that he can insert himself as he did with the serpent. We know that he roams to and fro throughout the earth, right? So there is a sense of roaming, but what is roaming? So I guess he can roam invisibly in this place called earth. But then before this place called earth was created, where's that place that he roams? And so we know that he had heavenly access, as in the case of Job. But like when he was cast out, was there another dimension that he was cast to, with special opportunities to come into God's presence from time to time? Again, a lot of questions today beyond the pay grade, but fun to think about.
Yes, this has definitely been an intellectual edition of Pastor's Perspective, more so than usual.
I don't know if intellectual is the right word. I think it's just, I don't know.
A speculative edition.
It's speculative.
Speculative.
Yeah.
That might be more like it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break here on Pastor's Perspective. If you're on hold right now, stay on hold. We'll get to you in just a few minutes when we start recording hour number 2. You can watch us recording hour number 2 on the Pastor's Perspective YouTube channel and Facebook page, and you'll hear the episode on the radio tomorrow, Lord willing, if all goes according to plan, and then we'll be live on Monday. But call us with your questions till 5 p.m. Pacific time today, 888-564-6173. Pastor's Perspective was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.